All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Rees. I'm with the National Weather Service in Peachtree City, Georgia, and I'll be doing your second special weather briefing on what is now Hurricane Zeta as of noon Wednesday, October 28th. Okay, so a little situation overview. Overnight, Zeta did strengthen into a Category 1 hurricane in the Gulf. We'll see where its positioning is in the next couple slides, but as you can see here from the National Hurricane Center's graphic, here pretty much heading into the northern Gulf, and landfall is expected this evening along the Louisiana coast, and then shortly after that, Zeta is expected to track across our area. You can see the timing here. We're looking at before 7 a.m. Thursday, tracking through our area, and then through early Thursday. And so those heavy rain and rain bands may move in as early as overnight, and we'll take a look at all of this. So, changes that we've had from yesterday. So, the main change is that our tropical storm watch was upgraded to a tropical storm warning, as you can see in the graphic to the left. In addition, the areal extent was expanded, so we included some more counties further south on this side here and further east, and it is still in effect through late Thursday morning. And I should also note we do have there are tropical storm watches further northeast of our area that cover the rest of the state of the rest of northeast Georgia. It's just not in this graphic, but we do have those as well in GSP's area. Otherwise, the major changes from yesterday are forecast sustained winds, including the wind gusts, have increased across portions of north and central Georgia, and so we'll take a look at that shortly. So we did just want to point out, as I mentioned yesterday, we're going to have that warm front that was lifting north through the day early today. And so what we saw from that was actually about a half an inch to 3 inches of rainfall. And this is pretty much over the past 12 hours. But with that warm front lifting, it kind of got hung up in the mountains there. So you can see some totals like Rome, 1.5 to 2 inches. We know areas in Ellijay, some people reported 3 inches, and then up in Blairsville as well with 2 to 3 inches. So we still are expecting additional rainfall as the storm approaches, but this was with that earlier rainfall we had mentioned yesterday. Okay, so taking a look at our threat levels, so it's changed a little bit from yesterday. Overall, we ended up increasing the wind threat. Like I mentioned on the previous slide, our winds have increased. And so we have sustained winds 20 to 45 miles per hour with wind gusts around 30 to 60 miles per hour possible. So because our wind gusts and sustained winds have increased, we did up that wind threat across north and central Georgia. As far as rainfall and flooding, nothing has changed from yesterday. We're still expecting the 2 to 4 inches, generally along and north of the I-85 corridor. And then if you take a look at the northeast mountains, we have higher amounts expected, around 4 to 6 inches. As far as river flooding, pretty similar to yesterday as well. We have our higher risk with the creeks and the smaller streams. And then as far as tornadoes go, we do have an isolated tornado threat generally across west central Georgia from like midnight through about 8 a.m. and then shifting across the rest of central Georgia for Thursday morning and afternoon. Okay, so I'll let this loop play here on the left, but we do have this satellite view of Hurricane Zeta as of just about an hour ago. And so the main takeaways for us was that we can start to see those showers and rain bands increase across our area overnight tonight into Thursday, and that's particularly over west central Georgia. And we're expecting the rainfall to become more widespread later on tonight, pretty much in the overnight hours into Thursday as Zeta crosses the area. So on the left-hand side here, I'll let this loop play a few times, but pretty much this is just one model solution that we're looking at, showing us what could happen with the storm, not a forecast of what actually will happen. The main things to point out, so after landfall, we're expecting Zeta to rapidly accelerate to the northeast. I'm sure you could notice that in the National Hurricane Center's graphic, but once that storm makes landfall, it will be jetting from southwest to northeast across our area in Alabama as well. And so with that storm track, we'll see the heaviest rain and the strongest winds. That axis will, for both of those, will fall along and north of the I-85 corridor. So the main things to point out here in this model loop, you can see there are some showers and storms that are expected to develop out ahead still for later on this afternoon. And then overnight, we're looking at Zeta moving through. So if I play one more time. And so here we're in the overnight hours, here in the early morning hours of Thursday as the storm tracks further northeast. So we'll talk about the winds on the next slide, But overall, the best timing for seeing those increased winds will be for west central Georgia, looking at about midnight to 8 a.m. And then as we shift into the metro areas and across portions of northwestern Georgia, just slightly later than that, from about 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then the rest of North Georgia and northeastern Georgia from about 3 a.m. to noon. So while these are looking at the best timing for increased winds, the highest wind threat would be pretty much smack dab in the middle of all these time frames. And so there's not too much variation between, west central Georgia and northeast Georgia just because of how quickly the storm is moving. So let's take a better look at some of those wind speeds. So here's the most likely time of arrival for tropical storm force winds graphic. These are the probabilities here. And so that red that's starting to nose into west central Georgia, that's a 70 to 80% chance of seeing sustained tropical force winds looking at overnight tonight into early Thursday. And so here, this graphic in the bottom right is showing our forecast sustained winds for early Thursday morning and into the afternoon. Looking at west central Georgia, we have those sustained winds in the 40 to 45 range, in the 35 to 40 and 30 to 35 further northeast. But overall, for the whole area, looking at about sustained 20 to 45 miles per hour. And so that'll begin pretty much late tonight in our overnight period tonight, continuing through Thursday. And that does include the Atlanta metro. Okay, so shifting to talk about wind gusts. So here's our forecast wind gusts. So as I mentioned, the sustained winds about 20 to 45 miles per hour, but our wind gusts are going to be significantly higher, around 30 to 60 miles per hour. So looking at portions of east central Georgia, pretty much in that 25 to 30 to 35 range. And as we get into portions of northern Georgia, seeing pretty much like 40 to 50 to 55 miles per hour possible. And one thing I will note is that across the higher elevations, we still could easily see some higher wind gusts and even a little bit earlier than what we mentioned on the previous slide. And that's just due to the higher terrain and the winds reaching them quicker. So otherwise, across the rest of northern Georgia, looking at pretty much about 50 to 55. And then as we mentioned for west central Georgia, the area with the highest threat of winds around 55 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts possible. And so again, for those areas, especially in these reds and dark reds and even the darker oranges, these increased wind speeds will cause issues with trees and power lines. And so these wind speeds easily can bring down trees and power lines, which would easily lead to power outages and blocked roadways because of trees. So just something to keep in mind, since our wind threat has significantly increased, as well as our forecast wind speeds and wind gusts have increased, that trees and power lines, in combination with the saturated soils from the rain that we've already gotten today, will easily be able to bring down those trees and power lines. And like I mentioned, with the higher elevations, we could still see some higher gusts possible with any stronger storms and within any of the heavier rain bands, plus the higher elevations. Okay, so as far as our rainfall potential, here we're looking at our flash flood watch, including our neighbors' flash flood watches as well, and that's still in effect through Thursday evening. The rainfall amounts are fairly similar to what we had yesterday, around 2 to 4 inches possible along and north of the I-85 corridor, with some locally higher amounts across the north and the northeast mountains, and models have been pretty consistent with keeping this axis of heavy rain along and north of 85. So here's our storm total rainfall forecast, and this is pretty much looking at just a few hours ago through Friday morning. Widespread, like I mentioned before, 2 to 4 inches along and north of the 85 corridor. And here's where I mentioned those higher elevations and other portions of northern Georgia where we could see a little bit higher totals. So sticking with the rainfall, we're looking at in the upper left our excessive rainfall outlook for late tonight into early Thursday morning, so through about 8 a.m. And then this one on the right-hand side here is pretty much looking at Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon. The main thing to note is that the green is a marginal risk of excessive rainfall, with the orange/brown being more of a slight risk of excessive rainfall. And all that you really need to note here is these areas outlined in green and orange have the greatest potential for flash flooding late tonight and then into tomorrow morning as well. So yesterday we talked a little bit about our daily average stream flow. The main thing that we noted was that In these greens and blues and dark blues, we already have above normal stream flow conditions, and this is where our heaviest axis of rainfall is forecast, so that additional rainfall will easily lead to flash flooding, and specifically within the flash flood watch area. Although Zeta will be moving pretty quickly compared to some other storms we have seen in the past, we're still expecting those 2 to 4 inches with some locally higher amounts along and north of the 85 corridor. Okay, so yesterday we also talked about the river basins. The main changes that we do have several points that are forecast to go to flood, and so we could see minor river flooding expected, with isolated moderate river flooding will be possible as well. So that would be both Tennessee basins across our northern border, the Coosa Basin, Tallapoosa, the Chattahoochee, at least the northern side, and then the northern Oconee, Okmulgee, and Flint river basins will all be within our flash flood watch. So the main thing to note here is that with these increased wind speeds, we could see leaves falling in addition to it's already fall, so there's leaves already on the ground. Those leaves on the ground plus the leaves that will be blown down by the winds will have the potential to exacerbate flooding across the area due to clogging up the storm drain. So that's definitely going to be something to look out for, especially with our increased wind speeds. So otherwise, we'll shift into our threat for severe weather. So here we're looking at the Day 1 Storm Prediction Center convective outlook, and we do have this marginal risk creeping into west central Georgia, portions of northern Georgia, and even hitting portions of the western metro. And this is for the increased threat for brief tornadoes from about midnight tonight through 8 a.m. So that's for these areas here. And then as we shift into tomorrow and looking at Thursday afternoon, we again have the potential for brief tornadoes. And that's generally across central Georgia, where you see the marginal risk has shifted across central Georgia here. And so that'll be for Thursday afternoon. So our key takeaways, so strong winds and heavy rain remain our primary concerns with Zeta. As far as the winds go, we have strong sustained winds and strong wind gusts, and combining that with the wet soils, we could definitely see down trees and power lines, which would lead to power outages. And in addition, we have the risk for a few tornadoes overnight tonight through Thursday afternoon, generally across central Georgia. Our current forecast also places the heaviest axis of rainfall across our area overnight into Thursday, generally along and north of I-85. And so that means that we have potential for flash flooding at night and into the early morning, so times when it's dark. So something else to watch out for. Overall, we increased our forecast confidence just slightly. I'd say, I guess we're at about a 4 now. Pretty much some of the uncertainty comes from the fact with such a quick moving storm, the rainfall amounts could change some just because the storm's moving so fast. But otherwise, with that really fast forward motion of the storm, that's where we're getting those higher wind gusts. So overall, those are the few uncertainties that we have, but we're continuing to monitor any changes that come from the National Hurricane Center track, which would shift our wind gusts and severe threat. But those are our main takeaways. Otherwise, we don't have any additional special weather briefings scheduled for Zeta as of now, because we'll be shifting into tropical operations later on this evening. Any updates that we may need to send, we'll likely send out through email if necessary. And so, like I mentioned before, I'll have the slides up shortly, but otherwise our routine weekly briefing will be moved to Friday, October 30th.